A heartless man ties a mother dog and her newborn puppies to a tree in the middle of a dark forest, leaving them to die. But what happens next will restore your faith in the power of love and survival. This mother's journey from abandonment to becoming the leader of the most unlikely family you've ever seen will leave you speechless. Stay with me, because this story gets more incredible with every twist. Jim Bannon had built his reputation in the rural valleys of Colorado as a dog breeder, but those who knew him understood the cold truth behind his success. To Jim, dogs weren't companions or family members. They were inventory, products to be evaluated, sorted, and discarded when they failed to meet his rigid standards. On a gray October morning, Jim stood in his kennel, staring down at Whitney, a beautiful mixed-breed dog who had just given birth to 6 tiny puppies. Her eyes, warm and trusting, looked up at him with the same devotion she'd shown for 3 years. But Jim's expression was stone cold. The puppies were small, fragile, and, in Jim's calculating mind, worthless. They lacked the aggressive temperament he demanded from his breeding stock. To him, they represented nothing but wasted resources, food, space, and time he wasn't willing to invest. "You're done," he muttered, his voice devoid of any warmth. Without ceremony, Jim loaded Whitney and her newborn puppies into the back of his rusted pickup truck. Whitney, still weak from giving birth, tried to keep her babies close as the vehicle bounced along increasingly rough roads. She had no idea that the man she'd trusted with her life was about to betray her in the cruelest way possible. The truck climbed higher into the mountains, leaving civilization far behind. Dense pine forests stretched endlessly in every direction, and the air grew thin and cold. When Jim finally stopped, they were in a clearing so remote that even the sound of distant traffic had vanished completely. Jim's movements were mechanical, practiced, as if he'd done this before. He dragged Whitney from the truck bed, while her puppies tumbled helplessly onto the forest floor. With rough hands, he secured a thick rope around her neck and tied it to the massive trunk of an ancient pine tree. "You're worthless to me now," he said, his words cutting through the mountain air like ice. "All of you." Whitney watched in confusion as Jim walked back to his truck. She wagged her tail once, twice, still believing this was temporary, that her owner would return with food or water or simply change his mind. But the engine roared to life, and the truck disappeared down the mountain road, leaving behind only the echo of grinding gears and the settling dust. As darkness crept across the forest, Whitney began to understand the horrible truth. The temperature dropped rapidly, and her newborn puppies, still blind and helpless, began to cry from cold and hunger. The forest came alive with sounds she'd never heard before. The distant howl of coyotes, the crack of branches in the wind, and the rustle of unseen creatures moving through the underbrush. Whitney pulled against the rope until her neck was raw, but the knot held firm. All she could do was gather her babies close, using her own body as a shield against the bitter mountain cold. She licked them gently, trying to keep them warm, whispering soft whimpers of comfort even as her own fear grew. The first night was the longest of Whitney's life. She dozed fitfully, jerking awake at every sound, every shadow that moved beyond the circle of moonlight. Her puppies pressed against her belly, seeking milk and warmth, but stress and dehydration were already affecting her ability to nurse them. When dawn finally broke through the canopy, Whitney's heart shattered. 4 of her 6 puppies lay still and cold against her side. The mountain night had claimed them despite all her efforts to keep them warm. She nudged them with her nose, licked their tiny faces, but there was no response. They were gone. Grief crashed over her like a physical blow, but Whitney couldn't afford to surrender to it. 2 puppies still lived, still needed her, and she would not let them suffer the same fate. something fundamental changed in Whitney that morning. The trusting, dependent dog that Jim had abandoned was gone, replaced by something fiercer, a mother with nothing left to lose. For hours, Whitney worked at the rope with her teeth. The thick fibers cut her gums and made them bleed, but she didn't stop. Every few minutes, she would pause to check on her surviving puppies, licking them to keep their circulation going, then return to her desperate task. Finally, as the sun reached its peak, the rope gave way. Whitney was free, but freedom in the wilderness meant nothing without the skills to survive. Whitney had never hunted, never had to find her own water or shelter. Everything she knew about survival would have to be learned in the next few hours, or her remaining puppies would join their siblings. Her first priority was water. Following her nose, Whitney found a small stream about a quarter-mile from the tree. The cold mountain water was the sweetest thing she'd ever tasted. She drank deeply, feeling strength return to her body, then hurried back to move her puppies to this new location, closer to the life-giving water source. Next came the harder challenge: food. Whitney's hunting instincts were dormant, buried under years of domestication. But desperation awakened them. Her first attempts were clumsy failures. She chased squirrels that easily outmaneuvered her, lunged at birds that took flight long before she got close. But hunger is a powerful teacher. Whitney learned to move more quietly, to use the wind to mask her scent, to wait patiently for the right moment. On her third day of freedom, she caught her first rabbit. The meat was tough and gamey, nothing like the kibble she'd known, but it was life itself. As days turned into weeks, Whitney transformed. Her soft house dog muscles hardened into lean, efficient hunting tools. Her senses sharpened until she could detect the slightest movement in the underbrush, the faintest scent on the wind. Most importantly, her puppies grew stronger, fed by their mother's newfound skills and unwavering determination. But the forest held dangers beyond hunger and cold. One morning, while following a game trail in search of prey, Whitney caught a scent that made every hair on her body stand on end. It was wild, predatory, and getting closer. She raced back to where she'd left her puppies, hidden in a hollow log, arriving just as the first wolf emerged from the tree line. They were magnificent and terrifying. 5 adult wolves moving with the fluid grace of apex predators. Their leader, a massive male with battle scars across his muzzle, fixed his golden eyes on Whitney and her pups. This was his territory, and they were trespassers. Whitney placed herself between the wolves and her babies, her lips pulled back in a snarl that surprised even her with its ferocity. The alpha wolf studied her for a long moment. He could have ended the confrontation in seconds, but something in Whitney's stance, the desperate courage of a mother protecting her young, gave him pause. He tilted his head, considering, then did something unexpected. He stepped back. With a low growl that seemed more like communication than threat, the alpha signaled to his pack. One by one, they melted back into the forest, leaving Whitney and her puppies unharmed. It was a reprieve she hadn't dared hope for, and a lesson in the complex social dynamics of the wilderness. But the forest wasn't finished testing Whitney's resolve. A few days later, while hunting near a rocky outcropping, Whitney heard sounds that made her blood run cold, the weak, desperate cries of abandoned young. Following the sound, she discovered a small cave where a female wolf lay dead, apparently killed by a rock slide. Beside her body, 3 tiny wolf pups whimpered helplessly, their eyes barely open, slowly starving without their mother's milk. Whitney stood at the cave entrance, torn between self-preservation and compassion. She already had 2 puppies to feed and protect. Taking on 3 more would stretch her resources to the breaking point and increase the danger to her own offspring. But as she looked at those helpless wolf pups, Whitney saw her own babies as they had been just weeks ago, vulnerable, innocent, and completely dependent on a mother's love. She couldn't walk away. Carefully, Whitney carried each wolf pup back to her den, where she arranged them alongside her own puppies. The mixing of species should have been impossible, but love knows no boundaries. Within hours, the wolf pups were nursing alongside Whitney's own babies, and she was grooming all 5 with equal tenderness. The challenges of raising this unlikely family were immense. The wolf pups grew faster and showed wilder instincts, while her own puppies remained more docile and dependent. But Whitney adapted, teaching each according to their nature, while fostering the bonds that would make them a true pack. As the weeks passed, Whitney's mixed family grew stronger and more coordinated. The young wolves taught the dogs about tracking and stealth, while the dogs shared their loyalty and cooperation. Together, they learned to hunt as a team, to watch for dangers, and to protect each other with fierce devotion. But their greatest test was yet to come. On a cold morning in late autumn, Whitney woke to the sound of aggressive howling echoing through the forest. A rival wolf pack had entered their territory, larger, more experienced, and with no tolerance for the unusual family Whitney had created. The attack came at dawn. 7 adult wolves surrounded Whitney's den, their intentions clear. They saw her mixed pack as an abomination, a threat to the natural order that had to be eliminated. Whitney fought with the fury of a mother defending her children. But she was vastly outnumbered. Her young wolves, barely half grown, stood beside her with remarkable courage, while her dogs added their own fierce determination to the battle. But against 7 adult wolves, their bravery seemed destined to end in tragedy. Just when defeat seemed certain, a familiar howl cut through the chaos. The scarred alpha who had spared Whitney months earlier emerged from the forest with his entire pack. The message was clear. Whitney and her family were under his protection. The battle that followed was swift and decisive. Caught between 2 forces and recognizing the alpha's superior strength, the rival pack retreated, disappearing into the deep forest with their tails between their legs. As silence returned to the clearing, the alpha approached Whitney once more. This time, his gesture was even more significant. He touched his nose to hers in a sign of respect and acceptance. Whitney had proven herself not just as a survivor, but as a leader worthy of recognition in the harsh hierarchy of the wild. In the months that followed, Whitney's unique family continued to thrive. Her mixed pack of dogs and wolves became a legend in the forest, a testament to the power of love to transcend all boundaries. They hunted together, played together, and protected each other with a bond that was stronger than blood. Whitney had been abandoned by a man who saw her as worthless, left to die in a place where survival seemed impossible. But through courage, determination, and an unbreakable maternal love, she had not only survived, she had created something beautiful and unprecedented. The forest that had once seemed like a death sentence became her kingdom. The family that had started with tragedy became a symbol of hope, and the dog that had been thrown away like garbage became a legend of resilience that would inspire anyone who heard her story. Sometimes the greatest strength comes not from what we're given, but from what we refuse to give up. Whitney's story reminds us that love, determination, and the will to protect those we care about can overcome even the most impossible odds. In a world that often seems cruel and unforgiving, Whitney proved that miracles are possible. They just sometimes come with 4 legs, a wagging tail, and a heart that refuses to surrender. If Whitney's incredible journey touched your heart, hit that like button and share this story with someone who needs to hear about the power of never giving up. Subscribe for more amazing true stories of survival and hope. And remember, Sometimes, the most extraordinary families are the ones that choose each other. Until next time, keep believing in miracles.